Hi, this is Dizzy, or the Classyaspie, and today I would like to talk about flat affect. And before I get started, I would like to let you know what my diagnosis is and who I am. I have been diagnosed with Asperger's and reconfirmed as Autism 1, and once it was removed from the DSM, I have dyspraxia, OCD, traits of OCD, and ADHD, dyscalculia, which is like a math disorder, that type of thing. A lot of the things that go with being on the spectrum, I have that going on. So with that in mind, I will be talking about flat affect, not just from my perspective, but from, I'll talk about what else can cause it as well. It's not always a trait or symptom of anything. So there's that. What's a flat affect and who gets it? A flat affect is an affect or demeanor that is low in emotional response. It doesn't necessarily mean the person is not experiencing emotion. It refers to the affect, and an affect is how you come off. It's not indicative of how much emotion you feel. It's indicative of how much emotion you can display. There can be correlation depending on what's going on with the individual. But for most people, especially on the spectrum, the flat affect or blunted affect, which I'll get into as well, is not indicative generally of not experiencing emotion. It is just how we get portrayed as having a lack of empathy. And with any group, you can have a lack of empathy, but it's more about how that comes off rather than what we feel. Such as someone telling me something bad happened, especially when I was younger, this would be my response. That's awful. Having a flat affect is actually maybe a bigger deal than you think if you don't have one, and especially if you're a woman, and I'll get into that later. Because how we present is treated differently from how men present. Now, I was born with a blunted affect, and a blunted affect is like a flat affect but with sprinkles of emoting in. It's not that like I could cry, and people with a flat affect aren't immune from crying. It's just often one of those things that it's harder for them to do. I developed into a flat affect in my teen years, and this is something I could speculate on why. Stress levels went up. My mother died. And once my mom died, I kind of, between my mom being sick and my mom dying, kind of suddenly, I feel like there's some trauma coping there on top of the autism that made a blunted affect that people kind of learned to deal with me, turned into a flat affect, and I couldn't cry anymore. I used to cry pretty regularly, not in an unhealthy way, but because as an artsy person, writer person, my mom viewed me as super empathetic for some reason. May God rest her soul. I probably don't come off empathetic to anyone watching this right now. People like that tend to cry or need outlets, you know, and especially a teenage girl. So when a teenage girl goes from, well, look at those shoes. I never did stuff like that, but let me stereotype us for a moment, girls for a moment. I went for, you know, you go from having kind of a, haha, and then back to the flat, or, huh, you suck, huh, back to the flat affect. It's not necessary. I'm making jokes here. I wasn't really saying that stuff, I hope. To just, and my friends would try to talk to me, I would be like, hi, no, I'm good. I didn't stop wearing black and start wearing bright colors to cope with my inner turmoil around my mother's death, who was my best and closest friend. I'm good. And then I went to therapy for like the first real time after that. My mom wasn't keen on mental health professionals. And you got to understand, my mom was born in 1950. She had me when she was a little older. So her point of view, different from what we have now with psychiatry and stuff. You know, they go watch Queen's Gambit. They were shoving kids full of what is benzodiazepines now. Sorry for the tangent. You clicked on an Asperger, autism type channel. But then I would have the actual internal reaction of shock. Let's say if it was someone telling me something like someone died, I would have the grief reaction, which is a full body shock response. If you've had things announced to you, you know what I mean. You might get sick. You might tremble and collapse. A flat effect person can still do all those things and still be sitting there flat toned. You can have a monotone and not have a flat effect, by the way. Those are not always the same, but generally the flat tone. The monotone goes with it. I need something to drink. I have red on my lips for the rest of this video, but we all just had to go get tested for the thing. And I think it's just allergies, but it's making my voice do quite a wretched thing. Now, lots of things cause a flat effect or blunted effect, and it can be indicative of no emotional response, but it often isn't. And one case where it often is, and I'm not trying to say people with schizoid personality disorder have no emotions, but they tend to have blunted emotions. One of the more odd things when I began this channel like 10 years ago that I found intriguing when I would talk to schizoid people who would reach out to me is that they would confirm, yeah, I like having pets, but I'm not enthralled with them. Which to me made a clear distinction between how autistics tend to operate emotionally and people with schizoid. And I'm not saying the schizoids are bad for that. It's just that their level of enjoyment on things tends to blunt out at a lower level than maybe even a schizophrenic, or someone on the spectrum, or even someone who has certain types of depression can have a flat effect. With schizophrenia, it gets a little tricky because there's also catatonic states. I'm so glad you're getting to hear the road construction outside. Sorry. I wrote a few of the more common traits of flat effect down, and I'll just read them. And it's appearing apathetic. Appearing. My voice, man. A monotone, low use of facial expressions. Flat effect is associated with autism, schizoid, schizophrenia, and types of depression. It's associated with many things. Many things. In fact, as you get older, and some people with dementia get a flat effect, and again, trying to find the overlap with certain things with catatonia and flat effect depends on how much that person can still do for themselves. And I would like to talk about the fact that having a flat effect as an autistic person and as a woman, it's a little debilitating, and I'll tell you why, and I'll also talk about what I did to alter my flat effect and learn to emote more and whether or not I regret it. I got my autism diagnosis when I was 20, and it had been talked about between ages 18 and 19 with professionals. But due to my presentation and gender, I was seen in my small town more as just a quirky figure who was off. Can I use the term idiot savant here because it was used about me? Because that's what people kind of called me in my hometown. It wasn't, and the dot was never connected back to me just having an uneven skill set that can be characteristic with certain presentations of autism. Now, where does my flat effect fit into this? Everywhere. So, having a flat effect when you're a girl, teenage girl, and woman, it makes you seem disinterested. It can make us seem bored, and especially if you have issues of eye contact like I do. I mean, I'm looking at the camera right now, but you have to understand I'm not talking to a person. Although I keep calling my ring light a she. I should give her a name. I'm thinking Eden. Women are expected to speak in a certain way, which is to be a little flighty. It's women often, when they speak to men, go look up Nicole Kessinger interviews with the Chris Watts case, when they're trying to seem more likable. And it's not like I'm not demeaning women for this at all or saying it's bad. It's just a biological trait where the voice will go higher when in customer service or talking to men or whatever. And a lot of it is actually biologically to help us survive. There's a lot that goes into that. There's also personality factors, genes, and just people's vocal cords. So I just want to throw that out there. There is an expectation for women that men don't always have. And I'm not saying the flat effect isn't debilitating for men either, because it can come off to other men either like you're too stoic and like a strong silent type when you're actually kind of going through something, or you're actually trying to express an emotion but you're like, and I imagine it causes a lot of problems for guys when dating. I mean, it has for me, and I'm a girl. I can play off of I don't play off of it, but other people project onto me that I'm shy and I'm not. Or they decide I'm Daria. Like, haha, you're like Daria. And I mean, I'm married, so it's not an issue now, but previously it would be like, that's so funny, haha, I'm interested for a few months, and then they'd be like, well, you're permanently weird. And I imagine guys go through something similar, but it's not quite the same type of stigma. As an 11-year-old girl, wanted to ride horse. I said wanted to ride horse. I wanted to ride horses. And the guy who was running the place, my dad wasn't going to get me a horse unless I learned I took a riding course all summer in the Louisiana heat. And I was on board. And then the guy who ran the thing, you know, with all the kids on their horses and their cowboy hats to, you know, teach riding, he was like, you should smile more, sunshine. And that's when 11-year-old me went, no, I won't. No, I will not. No, I shan't. Teachers, especially male teachers at school, would sarcastically call me sunshine, and I would be in a good mood. By second grade, I had learned to make my face look slightly less, I call it my Dahmer face, because I'm just like, to do this more. And this is by second grade, because this is how mean my teacher was about just my demeanor. Thank you. Now I'm permanently the Grinch. So, then you get to being a teenager, which, by the way, that happened for me when I was like 9. Not really, but I did hit puberty early, and I had a lot of people think I was a teenager when I was a child. And even as a teenager, the flat effect came off as me being aggressive. And it wasn't aggression. I would be like, I don't want peppers today. And because of how I would say it, it would be taken the wrong way. Not necessarily by a parent, maybe sometimes, but most certainly by faculty and staff at schools or friends' parents. Friends' parents were the worst, especially if I tried to be friends with other girls, because they viewed me as just this dark character. And a lot of it, I do believe, was my flat effect. I wasn't a bubbly girl. So that happened, and then it carried on into adulthood, and I actually began working on my flat effect via YouTube. I started this channel when I was in college in New York City, living with an Orthodox Jewish family, as at the time I was Orthodox. And I just thought I would record my diets or fasts and things like a vlog. And if you go back all the way to my first video, you can see how flat effect I actually was. And I've used this channel a bit to work on inflection, And one thing that I found interesting is that throughout my years of working on my inflection, I went from complete flat effect to cartoonish, which is funny because I actually used to mimic cartoons' facial expressions in the mirror when I was like 11, 12, going through that, you know, turning into a teenager phase that we all do, where we're all doing weird stuff to try and be acceptable. And I did not know I had autism at this point, okay? So I was in the mirror and I was like, how do I get rid of my serial killer face? Why do I look mad? And I would do stuff like, and other things I would do would be like, okay, cartoons on Sailor Moon, when they look surprised, they're like I tried very hard, perhaps in all the wrong ways, but I did try. And I've done well with facial expressions. I don't regret working on that a little bit because I've actually gotten good at sometimes being comedic with it, kind of like my mom was. She could tell a whole story with her facial expressions. Do I regret teaching myself to inflect as much as I do and to come off way bubbly if I need to? Okay. Like, that's a caricature. I actually come off pretty normal when I do it in public, a little energetic, because I am energetic. But an energetic person with a flat effect comes off aggressive. So, if I take my kid to the doctor like I did today, the flat effect has to be handled. It has to be managed. And it's tiring. Especially if I did more masking with, well, hello, doctor. Mighty fine to see you. I am a normal woman doing normal mom things right now. And then next appointment I come in and either my stomach hurts too much or it's later in the day and I'm just tired and I'm in flat effect. It can be viewed as a mood swing from the outside, and it's not. I can be in a great mood and have a flat effect. I can be in a great mood and my selective mutism kick in. So that can look bad, and especially when you're a mother, you don't want people thinking that your mood shifts constantly. And I'm not saying that to stigmatize anyone with a mood disorder. If you have a mood disorder, you probably know what I'm talking about when it comes to people viewing you a certain way. And especially dealing with, I'm going to say it, male PAs and sometimes doctors. If you have a flat effect, they'll be like, wow, calm down, calm down, calm down. You need to calm down. In their flat effect. I shall center myself. Job interviews. This is a fun one because it makes you look and sound bored and disinterested, even if you can recite everything about the company that you know. Such as, I applied to be a bartender a few years ago at like 40 places in person, and I researched the details of when the business is open, went in, thought I did well, but I was so flat the whole time, and because of my eye contact issues, where I either am like, or usually I just don't even face the person. I'm more like, I'll look at you and turn away type, which is actually closer to an Autism 2 thing than Autism 1, because usually with Autism 1, there's more faking it. Maybe more so with women. And maybe I just happen to have a few male characteristics thrown in there, or more common in men. I'm on a tangent now, and I have said so many times in the video, I'm horrified. A flat effect can actually not go well when you're dealing with law enforcement, because they may take it as a sign of disrespect, especially if they are expecting demeanor and emotional submission. And they tend to, because they're law enforcement. So it makes it come off. If you have issues with authority already and autistic with PDA, aka pathological demand avoidance, high issues with authority, little bit, why trust them just because they have authority? Like, and I'm not talking about just police, I'm talking about like anyone who's like, well, I'm in charge of this sanctuary. Wait, not sanctuary. Business. Whatever. Now, a flat affect isn't always just a constant trait for a person. I have a blunted affect. I don't think it's as severe of a flat affect as it once was, but it can be debilitating. And I would also like to point out that some people's flat affect comes and goes, because if they have something like schizophrenia, they can go from wildly expressive to nothing. And it's not always catatonia. Sometimes it's just stuff has stopped, or they're going through other things in their brain at that time, and then they'll be back to themselves. Sometimes once they restart their medication, because a lot of the time people with schizophrenia stop their medication. They just do. So do bipolar people. They'll take their meds and then they'll feel good and they'll be like, and just get rid of it. It's a nature of the illness. I'm not making fun of y'all for that at all. I kind of get it. Like, oh, I feel good now. I've done that with a stomach pill before, and ooh boy, did I regret it. I would also like to point out that people with schizoid usually do have a flat affect, a full-on flat affect. And it depends on the person with schizoid personality disorder, which, by the way, is very much not like schizophrenia, like at all. You can't plead insanity with a personality disorder. You can plead insanity with schizophrenia. And usually schizoid doesn't present with psychosis the same way maybe a schizoaffective schizophrenic would, as well as even a schizotypal personality. And they can vary wildly. Usually they're eccentric types, and that can present as a flat affect. So I would just like people to be mindful that someone with a flat affect is not necessarily bored. They're not necessarily not listening. And especially if they have issues of eye contact, they're probably listening, and they aren't necessarily trying to hurt your feelings at all. And they might be experiencing and empathizing with you deeply, and it not coming off that way. I'll give you an example. You walk in to your friend's house who has a flat affect, and they're like opening the door, they're polite, and then you say, I just found out my grandmother passed away, something like that. And they're like, well, I will get you some cookies now. And then instead of responding maybe appropriately, they just keep their flat affect, go to the kitchen, start getting cookies on a plate, and then they start having maybe a panic attack, or they cry, or the flat affect breaks for a moment if they're more blunted. And I'm speaking more about an autistic type of person rather than the schizoid manifestation of flat affect or schizophrenic manifestation, because there's different reasons for the flat affect. That is very different from someone not having the emotions involved with hearing that you're suffering grief right now. It's a delayed response, common in people on the spectrum, and the flat affect or blunted affect coming together to kind of make you seem like you're not compassionate, at least for a minute. So in going with this this same instance, a person's not going to have a delayed reaction because they didn't care. They probably are following a script, and a lot of us do that in social situations. Because I was raised in the South, I was somewhat given an edge over my flat affect because I can use very distinct politeness and manners, which is not something you're going to pick up on this channel, but in my real life. Napkin on lap, clap, clap. Anyway, I hope you like this video on flat affect and all the reasons it can happen, some of the reasons it can happen rather. And I would like to cover this topic a little bit more, because I don't see it talked about much at all. and especially not the aspects of it that can make your life difficult. I mean, it's not the same as needing a wheelchair by any means, but we don't really have to compare and contrast every disability or everything that can make people think less of you for something you can't control. Anyway, I hope everyone has a great week.